Every 3 seconds, somewhere on Earth, an insect smaller than a coin makes a decision that could determine whether an entire forest survives the next century, whether a mountain meadow continues to exist, or whether the food webs that sustain millions of species collapse entirely. These insects weigh less than a paperclip, live for mere weeks, and yet they control systems so vast and complex that human civilization depends on their daily choices. We're talking about wild pollinating bees, and the 6 things they control in nature will fundamentally change how you see the world around you. When we think of control in nature, we imagine apex predators stalking through forests, massive weather systems reshaping continents, or geological forces splitting mountains. But some of the most profound control mechanisms operate on an almost invisible scale, hidden in plain sight among the flowers in your backyard. Wild pollinating bees, those small, often overlooked insects buzzing from flower to flower, exercise a level of environmental control that rivals any force on Earth. They don't just visit flowers randomly in search of nectar, they make calculated decisions about resource allocation, timing, and distribution that ripple through ecosystems in ways that most of us never consider. Each bee colony operates like a distributed intelligence network, with individual workers constantly gathering information about nectar concentrations, pollen quality, flower abundance, disease presence, and seasonal timing. This information gets processed collectively through complex communication systems, including the famous waggle dance that conveys precise geographic coordinates to potential food sources. The resulting decisions control 6 fundamental aspects of how nature operates, creating cascading effects that touch every level of ecological organization, from individual plants to global climate patterns. The first thing wild bees control is plant genetic diversity across entire landscapes, operating as nature's most sophisticated genetic courier service. When a bee visits a flower, it's not just collecting nectar and pollen for its own needs, it's actively participating in one of the most complex genetic engineering projects on Earth. Bees exhibit what scientists call flower constancy, meaning they tend to visit the same species of flowers during a single foraging trip, sometimes flying several miles while remaining loyal to just one type of bloom. This behavior ensures effective pollination by preventing the waste that would occur if bees constantly switched between flower types, but it's their movement patterns between different populations of the same plant species that creates genetic highways spanning vast distances. A single wild bee might carry pollen from a mountain meadow down to a valley floor, mixing genetic material between plant populations that could be separated by miles of seemingly inhospitable terrain. Over the course of a flowering season, bees create an intricate network of genetic exchange that maintains evolutionary adaptability across fragmented landscapes. This constant genetic shuffling allows plant species to respond to environmental changes, resist emerging diseases, and colonize new habitats as conditions shift. Without this bee-mediated gene flow, plant populations would become isolated, genetically impoverished, and vulnerable to extinction when faced with new challenges. Research has shown that plants and habitats with diverse wild bee communities maintain significantly higher genetic diversity than plants in areas where bee populations have declined. This genetic diversity represents evolutionary insurance, providing the raw material for adaptation to future environmental changes that we can't yet predict. The second control mechanism operates through what researchers call pollination networks, complex webs of interdependence that determine which plant species can coexist in any given habitat. These networks function like intricate puzzles where every piece must fit perfectly for the whole system to work. Different bee species have evolved remarkably specialized relationships with different types of flowers, creating what ecologists call phenotypic matching. Some bees have long tongues perfectly suited for deep tubular flowers, others have short tongues ideal for shallow, open blooms. Some bees are buzz pollinators, capable of using high-frequency vibrations to shake pollen loose from flowers that won't release their reproductive material any other way. These specialized relationships mean that wild bees essentially act as ecological gatekeepers, deciding which plants get to reproduce successfully in any ecosystem. When a particular bee species disappears from a habitat, the plants that depend exclusively on that bee for pollination may also vanish, creating cascading effects throughout the food web. It's like removing specific cables from a complex electrical grid. Some connections are redundant and the system continues functioning, but others are absolutely critical, and their removal causes widespread system failures. Scientists have discovered that the most stable ecosystems are those with the most complex pollination networks, where multiple bee species can pollinate each plant species, and each bee species can utilize multiple plant species. This redundancy provides resilience against environmental shocks, but it requires maintaining diverse wild bee communities. If you're finding this fascinating, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're just getting started with how these tiny insects control systems that affect your daily life in ways you've never imagined. The third thing controlled by wild bees is the timing of entire seasonal cycles across multiple trophic levels. Bees don't just respond to environmental cues, they create temporal frameworks that other organisms must follow to survive and reproduce successfully. Wild bees emerge from their winter dormancy or nesting sites based on complex calculations involving temperature accumulation, day-length changes, and the availability of early flowering plants. This emergence timing creates a synchronized cascade that structures the activity patterns of entire ecosystems. Early spring flowers have evolved to bloom precisely when bees become active, creating a co-evolutionary dance between pollinator and plant that has been refined over millions of years. But this temporal synchronization extends far beyond the simple relationship between flowers and bees. Birds that feed on insects time their migration and breeding cycles to coincide with peak insect abundance, which includes the predictable emergence of bee populations. Predatory insects and spiders position themselves along known bee flight corridors, timing their own reproductive cycles to coincide with maximum prey availability. Even mammals adjust their foraging and denning patterns to take advantage of the increased plant reproduction that follows successful bee pollination. Bears emerging from hibernation seek out areas where bee activity has resulted in abundant fruit production from the previous year. Rodents time their breeding cycles to coincide with peak seed availability from bee-pollinated plants. Wild bees essentially function as nature's master clock, and their activity patterns create temporal niches that allow multiple species to coexist by partitioning resources across time. When bee emergence timing shifts due to climate change or habitat disruption, these carefully orchestrated seasonal relationships can collapse, leading to mismatches between species that depend on each other. The fourth control mechanism might be the most economically significant for human societies. Wild bees control agricultural productivity through mechanisms that extend far beyond the direct pollination of crop plants. While most people understand that bees pollinate food crops, the relationship between wild bee populations and agricultural productivity operates on multiple levels that most farmers and agricultural scientists are only beginning to appreciate. Wild bees maintain the diverse plant communities in agricultural landscapes that support entire webs of beneficial organisms. These wild plant communities, kept genetically diverse and reproductively successful through bee pollination, serve as ecological reservoirs for beneficial predatory insects that provide natural pest control services worth billions of dollars annually. They also provide alternative food sources and nesting sites for pollinators when crops aren't flowering, ensuring that pollinator communities remain stable and available when farmers need them most during critical flowering periods. Research conducted across multiple continents has demonstrated that farms surrounded by wild bee habitat produce significantly higher yields than farms in simplified landscapes, even when those farms use managed honey beehives for pollination. The presence of wild bees increases not just the quantity of pollination, but also its quality, leading to better fruit set, larger fruit size, and improved nutritional content in many crops. Wild bees also provide what economists call insurance pollination. While managed honey bees can be vulnerable to diseases, pesticide exposure, and colony collapse, wild bee communities include hundreds of different species with different vulnerabilities and life cycles. This diversity ensures that pollination services continue even when some species experience population crashes. The fifth thing controlled by wild bees operates through soil chemistry and forest structure, creating what soil scientists call bioturbation cascades. When bees pollinate plants, they're determining not just whether those plants reproduce, but where their offspring will establish and grow. This spatial control over plant reproduction has profound effects on soil development, nutrient cycling, and the three-dimensional structure of terrestrial habitats. Many plants that depend on bees for reproduction produce seeds with specific germination requirements, leading to clustered patterns of establishment that create microhabitat diversity within larger ecosystems. Successful bee pollination leads to increased plant reproduction, which creates more leaf litter, more extensive root systems, and more organic matter input into forest soils. This organic matter supports complex communities of soil microorganisms, which in turn affect nutrient cycling, water retention, and the chemical environment that determines which species can survive in any particular location. Some bee-pollinated plants are nitrogen fixers, adding essential nutrients to soils that benefit entirely different plant species in a process called facilitation. Others have deep root systems that bring minerals up from lower soil layers, making these nutrients available to shallow-rooted plants through leaf fall and root turnover. Through their pollination activities, bees indirectly engineer the chemical and physical properties of entire ecosystems, creating conditions that can persist for decades or even centuries. Take a moment to share this video with someone who might be amazed by these hidden connections in nature, and let's continue exploring how these tiny pollinators shape our world. The sixth and perhaps most profound thing that wild bees control is the stability and resilience of entire landscapes when faced with environmental disruption. Ecosystems face constant disturbances ranging from natural events like fires, storms, droughts, and floods, to human activities including development, agriculture, and climate change. The speed and success with which ecosystems recover from these disturbances depends largely on the reproductive success of surviving plants and their ability to recolonize disturbed areas. Wild bees provide the pollination services that enable this recovery, but their role extends far beyond simply ensuring plant reproduction. Bee-pollinated plants often produce offspring with higher genetic diversity than plants that rely on self-pollination or wind pollination, providing the evolutionary raw material needed for adaptation to changed environmental conditions. Additionally, the flight range and foraging patterns of different bee species determine how quickly plant communities can spread and establish in recovering habitats. Long-distance foraging bees can carry genetic material across barriers that might otherwise prevent recolonization, while ground-nesting species actually benefit from some types of soil disturbance, creating early successional habitat conditions that favor pioneer plant species. These pioneer plants often provide the foundation for ecosystem recovery, creating conditions that allow other species to gradually re-establish. The mathematical reality of bee control becomes staggering when we consider the cumulative effects of millions of individual pollination decisions made daily across the globe. A single wild bee colony might facilitate tens of thousands of successful plant reproduction events during a single flowering season. Each event represents a choice, conscious or unconscious, about which individual plants reproduce successfully and contribute their genetic material to the next generation. Multiply this across the estimated 20,000 species of wild bees worldwide, each making these reproduction decisions for different sets of plants, in different habitats, at different elevations and latitudes, at different times of year, and the scale of control becomes almost incomprehensible. We're looking at billions of daily decisions that collectively determine the genetic composition, species diversity, seasonal timing, spatial distribution, and evolutionary trajectory of terrestrial ecosystems across the planet. What makes this system even more remarkable is that it operates largely outside of human awareness and management. Unlike agricultural systems where humans make deliberate choices about what to plant, when to plant, and how to manage crops, the vast majority of plant reproduction on Earth happens through this distributed network of wild bee decision-making. These insects, operating on instinct and environmental cues refined over millions of years of evolution, are essentially running the biosphere's reproductive economy without any central planning, oversight, or conscious coordination. Before we finish, make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you're amazed by the hidden power of these tiny pollinators and want to support content that reveals the invisible connections that keep our planet functioning. The implications become sobering when we consider that many wild bee species are experiencing unprecedented population declines due to habitat destruction, pesticide use, climate change, invasive species, and disease. As bee species disappear from ecosystems, they take with them not just their own evolutionary legacy, but their irreplaceable roles in maintaining the control systems that keep natural communities functioning. Some plants may lose their only effective pollinators, facing immediate reproductive failure and eventual extinction. Some genetic highways between plant populations may be permanently severed, reducing evolutionary adaptability. Some seasonal synchronizations may be disrupted, causing cascading effects through food webs. Some agricultural landscapes may lose their natural pest control services and pollination insurance. Some disturbed habitats may lose their capacity for natural recovery. This transformation is happening right now, in the forest outside your window, in the meadow across town, in the margins of agricultural fields, in urban parks and gardens, everywhere that wild plants and wild bees have coexisted for millions of years. Every day, as you go about your normal routine, this invisible control system continues operating in the background, making decisions that maintain the biological infrastructure our civilization depends upon. The 6 types of control exercised by wild pollinating bees represent some of the most fundamental processes that keep natural systems stable and productive, and yet most of us remain completely unaware of their existence, let alone their critical importance for our own survival and prosperity. The next time you see a wild bee working its way methodically through flowers in a garden or natural area, remember that you're witnessing one of Earth's most powerful and essential controllers in action. A tiny insect whose daily choices help determine the fate of entire ecosystems, including the one that sustains human civilization. In that moment, you're observing the invisible hand that shapes the living world, one flower visit at a time.